Hey guys, tonight we curl up beside the flickering hearth of ancient Greece, where the flames burn slow and the myths are, honestly, a bit introverted. This isn't one of those action-packed Greek tales with sword fights, shape-shifting gods, or Zeus throwing thunder tantrums. No, tonight, we follow the quietest of the Olympians. The one who never caused a scene, rarely left her post, and very politely declined the offer of godly drama. We're talking about Hestia, goddess of the hearth. She didn't launch wars, she didn't turn people into shrubs, and she never turned up at Olympus parties just to argue with relatives. Instead, she tended the eternal flame, stayed home, and made sure everyone else had somewhere warm to return to. It's the mythological equivalent of reading quietly in the corner, while your family argues over board games. And you're going to love it. That said, you probably wouldn't last a day in ancient Greece, especially if your job was fire maintenance, city unity, and dodging divine advances before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of an open-air courtyard. The sky above is cloudless and olive-gray. It's early morning in a small Greek polis, and the hearth at the center of the home is just beginning to glow. Not with fire yet, but with anticipation. A clay bowl of dried fig bark and olive wood sits nearby, waiting to feed the flame. You kneel beside it, the cool marble pressing through your robe, and reach for the flint. Hestia isn't loud. She doesn't demand devotion with claps of thunder or waves of saltwater wrath. But every home you've ever known bows to her anyway. She lives in the flame that cooks your breakfast, the embers that warm your bed, and the subtle warmth that makes stone walls feel like a place to belong. She's not a goddess of spectacle. She's a goddess of staying put. Born first among the Olympians, yes, even before Zeus, Hestia entered the world with the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen this all before. Rhea, her mother, promptly handed her over to Cronus, who, true to form, swallowed her whole. That's just how things worked in divine infancy. But Hestia, in her steady way, didn't complain. She was the first in, and ironically the last out, because when Zeus tricked Cronus into vomiting up his divine children, Hestia emerged last. Firstborn and last freed. A full-circle goddess, really. Perfect symmetry. Historians still argue whether Hestia's position as the first and last says more about birth order politics or about symbolic completeness. Some claim it's all metaphor, the hearth as both beginning and end. Others think the myth writers just liked a bit of poetic irony. Either way, it stuck. And while Zeus got the thunderbolt and Poseidon went full trident, Hestia got the fireplace. And she made it work. You shuffle forward in time, now standing in an early temple where her flame is lit not by worshippers but by city-appointed flamekeepers, usually young women, trained to keep the fire alive as if it were a living creature. The air smells like pine resin and dust. No incense, no feasting. Just silence, and a gentle hiss of burning. It might sound boring, because it is. But in the same way a hot bath is boring. Or a soft blanket on a rainy afternoon. Hestia's divinity is about things that never change. That you can rely on. That ask nothing of you except maybe to stop pacing and sit down for a moment. Even in Olympus, amid all the divine squabbling and peacock feather egos, Hestia sat quietly, avoiding family politics like a seasoned dinner guest with a full mouth. She was offered marriage by Poseidon and Apollo, two very eligible, very loud suitors, and turned them both down with the mythic equivalent of, "Thanks, I'd rather fold laundry." Instead, she vowed eternal virginity, not out of prudishness, but for independence. And maybe, just maybe, to keep things simple. There's a certain brilliance in that. While other gods were busy embroiling mortals in dramatic affairs and punishing them with frogs, Hestia kept her hearth glowing. Steady. Reliable. Underrated. And when cities were founded, it was Hestia's fire that was carried from the mother city to the new colony. A literal spark of home, cradled in flame. No founding festival began without her. No meal was served before her name was spoken. You had to thank Hestia before you could dig in. Even the rowdiest Greeks knew better than to skip her. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a passing scholar in a dusty scroll shop: supposedly, Hestia never left Olympus. Ever. She didn't ride golden chariots or shapeshift into swans. She just stayed put. Historians still debate whether that's literal or symbolic. Maybe she truly never traveled. Or maybe the ancients just respected her too much to embroil her in goat-based love triangles. You walk now through a corridor of statues, all marbled muscles and dramatic poses. Zeus, with lightning clenched. Ares mid-battle cry. Even Dionysus frozen in the act of spilling wine. Hestia's statue is last. Simple. Seated. Cloaked modestly, holding a small torch. No grand gesture. No peacock feathers. But something about her stills the room. A small flame flickers behind her pedestal. Always lit. You move quietly through the halls of Olympus, though halls might be generous. Imagine a gleaming, sky-hung villa with far too many columns and not nearly enough chairs. Marble underfoot, gold leaf on every surface, and a light mist from the clouds curling through the arches. You half expect someone to hand you a goblet or challenge you to a poetry contest at any moment. But there's one room here that rarely sees a party. No echoes of lyre music or dramatic toasts. Just a low-burning hearth, a few neatly arranged cushions, and a divine sense of please don't knock. This is Hestia's domain. It doesn't look like much, but it smells faintly of myrrh and warm wheat, and you feel an almost parental calm the moment you step inside. This isn't a room designed to impress. It's designed to remind the gods, busy as they are, that even immortals need somewhere to warm their metaphorical toes. It's said that Hestia never took a throne at all. She gave up her seat in the 12 Olympians so Dionysus, the new kid with a flair for parties and leopard accessories, could have one. Not because she was kicked out, or because she didn't belong, but because she just didn't care about status. She was, essentially, the celestial version of "I'll stand, thanks." Historians still argue whether this myth was a late addition to make room for Dionysus in the official roster or a reflection of Hestia's ever-gentle character. Either way, it's very on brand for her to shrug and make space. You reach out now and trail your fingers across the smooth, white stone beside her unclaimed throne. It's worn in places, as though someone used to sit there more often, long before the other gods began turning their debates into shouting matches. There's something pleasing about its emptiness. Not sad. Just restful. Because Hestia never needed grandeur. She was the center of the home, the unmoving stillness around which everything else whirled. And that idea made its way into the real world, too. In nearly every Greek home, rich or poor, there was a hearth. And at that hearth, there was ritual. When someone married, they carried a torch from the family hearth to their new one. When soldiers returned from war, they made offerings to Hestia before reuniting with family. When food was prepared, the first bite was hers. Symbolically, of course. Gods are notoriously picky eaters. You sit now beside one such hearth, a modest one, in a cottage nestled among vineyards and thyme. A woman hums softly as she kneads dough. Her child plays nearby, arranging smooth pebbles in careful rows. In the fire, a clay dish bubbles quietly. You can't name the dish, but it smells like garlic, goat cheese, and slow comfort. And you realize, this is what Hestia guarded. Not temples. Not armies. Not glory. Homes. Even when cities fought, the hearth stayed lit. Even when families quarreled, someone made tea. It's a kind of peace that isn't flashy enough for textbooks, but far more enduring. One fringe belief you overhear as you lean against the warm bricks. Some folks claim that every hearth had a tiny spark of Hestia herself, like a divine ember that traveled through time and smoke. And that if you ever felt truly at home, it meant she'd settled there for a while. It's a sweet thought, and one that stuck for centuries. Of course, not everyone was a fan of that kind of omnipresent warmth. In the more dramatic plays of the era, Hestia is often not featured. There's just not enough plot to go around when the goddess in question never leaves the house or sets anything on fire, other than logs, very responsibly. Playwrights preferred more volatile characters, ones who turned rivals into spiders or fell in love with bulls. You know, the classics. But still, in quiet corners of poetry and domestic hymns, her name was whispered with a kind of gratitude. She didn't need a spotlight because she was the glow at the center of everything. You watch now as the child places her last pebble, triumphant. The woman smiles, pinches off a bit of dough, and presses it into the fire on a flat stone, an offering. Just a sliver, barely a bite. But that's all it takes. The smoke curls upward and disappears. If gods can sigh contentedly, Hestia surely does. There's another curious footnote you remember now, tucked away in the minds of the more mystical historians. Some believe that Hestia's presence extended beyond the hearth into public life, that every city's prytanean, or communal hearth house, kept a flame for her that symbolized the soul of the entire community. If it ever went out, it was considered a very bad omen. Like when your Wi-Fi drops during a deadline. This communal flame was tended carefully, often by women of high reputation and calm temperament. Which, in ancient Greece, was a job description with surprisingly high standards and zero dental plans. You step inside one of these public halls, where a group of flamekeepers pass the duty hand to hand like a living relay. There's little speaking. Just nods, the occasional sip of water, and the flicker of light dancing across polished amphorae. It's so soothing you nearly forget you're in a myth. Which is perhaps the best compliment you could give Hestia. She doesn't feel mythological. She feels familiar. Like the glow from your childhood bedroom night light. Like a kettle that whistles the moment you walk into the kitchen. You exit quietly, your thoughts now wrapped in the faint smell of wood smoke and old figs. Olympus may sparkle, but it's down here, in firelight and repetition, where Hestia's power lingers. You trail your fingers along the edge of a weathered olive wood doorway, stepping into yet another modest home, this one tucked beneath a rocky slope where vines grow sideways and goats stare like philosophers. The hearth here glows a little brighter, casting wobbly light onto thick stone walls and a floor swept clean enough to eat off, though you wouldn't dare. Not without asking. The woman stirring the pot tonight is older, with a face like a well-read scroll and arms that know the weight of dough, water jars, and centuries of stories. She hums a hymn, something half-spoken, half-sung, while adjusting the logs to keep the flame steady. If the goddess Hestia ever walked the earth unnoticed, you suspect she looked like this. Or at least wore the same expression, quiet focus with a side of gentle refusal to tolerate nonsense. In many ways, Hestia's whole brand was not being dramatic. A rare feat among immortals who often turn petty arguments into natural disasters. Remember when Poseidon flooded a city over a naming contest? Or when Hera turned a woman into a cow out of marital spite? Hestia's biggest public act was giving up her seat, and she did that without demanding a monument or a weekend named in her honor. That's the first real sign she's a goddess of domesticity. Because you know who else gives things up without fuss? People who run homes. The ones who hand over the last piece of bread. The ones who don't speak first at dinner. The ones who refill the olive oil without being asked. Historians still argue whether Hestia was once a more prominent deity before being softened into a sort of background divinity. Some ancient writers suggest she had a larger following before the Olympian 12 became set in stone, or rather, in marble friezes and souvenir plates. But here's the thing, in real life, hearths never stayed in the background. They were the centerpiece. The physical heart of the home. And for travelers, the sight of a lit hearth was better than a signpost or a warm welcome. It was both. You now walk down a narrow lane in an old village, a place too small to have ever made it into the big epic poems. But every house you pass has a telltale wisp of smoke curling up into the stars. And you know what that means: someone is home. Someone is making soup. And someone is honoring Hestia, even if they're too tired to say her name aloud. In this village, there's a tradition passed from grandmother to granddaughter, a hearth blessing at the start of each month. Just a sprinkle of salt, a prayer for safety, and a reminder to sweep the ashes to the right side. Why the right side? No one remembers. That's how you know it's a proper tradition. You stop by one of these homes and notice a small wooden icon tucked above the mantel, simple, hand-carved, and smoothed by many hands. The figure depicted isn't grand or terrifying. She wears no crown, holds no thunderbolt. Just a flame cupped in both palms. And suddenly you understand why Hestia never demanded temples. Because when you're already in every home, you don't need to build more. Still, there were a few temples. But they didn't look like the grand columns we usually associate with Greek worship. Hestia's sacred spaces were usually modest, round, and open to the sky. That circular design mattered. It symbolized unity, eternity, and the way a family or city could gather around a shared center. If the gods had IKEA catalogs, Hestia's would be the section titled Functional and Inviting with Minimal Earthquakes. One such temple stands at the edge of a seaside town now lost to time. You pause before its crumbling remains, and even though the flames long gone, the stones still hold warmth. A few fig trees grow nearby, as though keeping vigil. And if you sit very still, you can almost hear the murmur of footsteps, of sandals on stone, of someone bringing a handful of grain as an offering, something so small, so humble, and yet perfectly fitting. You picture this coastal temple at its peak, perhaps early spring. A priestess in saffron robes lights the morning flame while fishermen untangle their nets nearby. A child tries to sneak a handful of raisins meant for the goddess and is gently swatted by a grandparent who remembers when they tried the same thing. Life rolls forward, and the flame stays lit. That's the core of Hestia's role, really. She didn't make waves, she kept things steady. A cosmic librarian of warmth and welcome, clocking in daily to ensure no one started yelling before breakfast. Of course, the Greeks being Greeks, they didn't always agree on how to worship her. In some regions, Hestia was barely mentioned in public ritual. In others, she was the first name uttered during every prayer, no matter the occasion. Theologians of the time, because yes, even ancient Greece had armchair experts, debated whether she should be included in the 12 or considered above them, or maybe beside them but with a polite note saying will not be attending. Fringe mythologists even posited that Hestia was older than all the others, not just by birth order, she was the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, but by cosmic role, that she represented fire's first flicker, the organizing principle of civilization itself. Which, when you think about it, is a pretty impressive resume line, helped humanity invent staying indoors. You smile at that thought as you warm your hands near a village hearth, its embers casting a steady glow. You've wandered from the marble heights of Olympus to the time-scented villages of mortal life, and still Hestia's presence holds. She isn't loud, but she is there. Like the silence after a kettle's whistle. Like the pause before bread is broken. Like a chair that always faces the fire, even when no one's sitting in it. You stretch your legs as you leave the warmth of that quiet village hearth behind, the kind where dogs nap beneath tables and no one locks their doors because the only thing worth stealing is leftover lentil stew, and even that's debatable. The road ahead winds through olive groves and sunlit silence, and up in the distance, you see the flicker of another fire, this one not in a home, but in the city heart, the Prytanean. If Hestia ruled the domestic hearth, the Prytanean was her public office. Every Greek city-state worth its salt, literal or metaphorical, had one. It was the official building where the communal sacred fire of Hestia was kept burning day and night. Not just for ambience, but to symbolize the unity and life of the city itself. The equivalent of a municipal group hug. You step into one now, well, the ghost of one. Corinth, maybe? Or Argos. The stones here remember you, even if they forget your name. You walk beneath a low arch and into a circular chamber. The scent of centuries old ash still clings to the air, along with a faint echo of ceremonial sandals and very official throat clearing. This is where ambassadors were welcomed, where orphans were protected, where former athletes might show up uninvited and say, "So, I lit your city's name on fire at the games. You're welcome." And the city would nod politely and offer them wine. The fire of Hestia was more than symbolic, it was citizenship in flame form. Lose it, and you weren't just cold. You were cast out. Historians still argue whether this fire had practical use. Did it heat the room? Was it used in cooking? Or was it a purely ceremonial blaze, carefully tended by civil servants who got really into firewood aesthetics? Some archaeologists suspect different prytania had different roles, depending on region, century, and how persuasive the local temple architect was feeling that week. And if someone let the flame go out? Not ideal. Relighting it wasn't just a matter of striking a flint. Oh no. You'd need purification rites, probably a new moon, and at least 3 people who could convincingly chant without tripping over syllables. But here's the charming quirk. Whenever a new colony was founded, think spin-off city for your favorite Greek Polis, the settlers would carry a torch lit from the mother city's Prytanean flame. A literal extension of the home fire, sent across the sea in a sort of eternal relay race. You imagine the logistics. A small clay lantern, tucked inside a sailor's cloak, fanned carefully during storms, guarded like a treasure chest, and finally brought ashore with great ceremony and, one hopes, at least a few people pretending not to sneeze from all the incense. So there you are now, standing beside one of these colonial fires as it's lit in a new city, maybe Syracuse, maybe Massalia. The townsfolk cheer, the elders nod, and one small child immediately tries to toast a fig on it. Human nature, across the centuries, remains refreshingly consistent. You wander down a new street now, a little more marble than dirt, and pass another hearth, this one indoors but stately. It belongs to a gymnasium, the place where Greek youth learned the finer things in life, wrestling, poetry, and how not to drop your stylus mid-ode. There's a brazier in the corner and a statue of Hestia nearby, not too large, but polished from years of respectful touch. In places of learning, too, she was present, quietly warming minds. In Homeric verse, Hestia rarely appears. She's not the kind of deity who throws spears or seduces mortals while disguised as a particularly charismatic swan. But when invoked, she's first. Every banquet, every sacrifice, every dear gods, please don't let me mess this up prayer opened with a nod to her. She's the beginning, the welcome mat, the before we start, let's think. Still, not every tale leaves her untouched. In one lesser-known myth, the lusty satyr Priapus, god of gardens, boundary stones, and questionable bedtime stories, tries to assault Hestia while she sleeps. He is thwarted, depending on the version, by a donkey's bray, a torch-bearing goddess, or the sheer force of Hestia waking up and giving him the look. You know the one. The I bake the bread around here, don't even try me look. Quirky as it sounds, this myth underlines something important. Even in a pantheon full of chaos and questionable consent, Hestia remains a boundary goddess. Not through violence, but through refusal. She sets limits. She maintains the line between sacred and profane. And when needed, she reminds satyrs that not everyone is available for plot development. You continue walking, and the sun lowers gently toward the horizon. You're in a rural village now. A few chickens, a sleepy mule, and one old man carving something beside his own hearth. It's a whistle. You ask him what for, and he says, to wake the bread. You nod like that makes sense, because in this moment, somehow, it does. You sit beside him and share a simple supper, bread, olives, something fermented in a jug that's definitely older than it tastes. He tells you stories of his grandmother's hearth blessing song, of how his parents met during a village festival when the hearth flame flared up for no reason. Hestia approved, he says. And he says her name like it's normal, like it's air. That's her legacy, really. Not the grand statues or the epic tales, but the breathe before the story begins. The warmth that says you're safe here. You're home. While other gods chase glory, Hestia tended the roots. And when the banquet was over and the crowd had gone home, she stayed behind to sweep the floor. Which, honestly, sounds like the most divine act of all. The sky now settles into a richer indigo as you rise from your seat by the village hearth, brushing crumbs from your tunic and feeling just a little too full from the fermented mystery jug. Your feet carry you away slowly, as if they, too, are reluctant to leave that quiet warmth behind. The road narrows again, and you pass a low stone wall where goats doze like lumpy cushions with horns. Beyond it, A humble temple looms, not grand, not gleaming, but still marked with care. This is one of Hestia's rarer sanctuaries. You wouldn't find many of these, you know. Unlike her Olympian siblings, who seem to commission temples the way modern influencers commission merch drops, Hestia rarely demanded, or even accepted, her own architectural spotlight. In fact, she relinquished her seat among the 12 Olympians entirely so Dionysus could have one. That's right. She stepped aside for the god of wine and regrettable decisions. Because, as always, she preferred the glow of the hearth to the glare of a throne. Historians still argue whether this divine game of musical chairs was part of early myth or a later poetic flourish. Some sources say she was never counted in the 12 at all, while others insist she was simply too polite to interrupt. Either way, her choice remains fascinating, the goddess who chose obscurity. Or maybe peace. Or maybe just didn't want to listen to Apollo's lyre solos anymore. You step inside the modest sanctuary. There are votive offerings, small clay bowls, scraps of woven fabric, bundles of dried herbs. Nothing lavish. Just tokens of gratitude, of protection, of daily life honored in miniature. One cracked plaque reads, in faint scratchings, "May the bread rise, may the roof not leak." Honestly, that's the kind of prayer that's aged perfectly. In the center is a hearth, naturally. No altar, no gold leaf statue, just a circular stone basin where a fire once burned, probably tended by a village priestess with soot-streaked hands and the patience of someone who stares at embers for a living. You reach out your fingers toward the empty basin, and though there's no heat, you swear it still hums faintly with the memory of flame. Outside, a group of children chase each other around a fig tree, giggling with the kind of unrestrained joy that tends to make poets cry. Their mothers sit nearby, weaving or shelling beans, occasionally shouting corrections, "Not in your mouth, Theophilos," which feels, somehow, like a form of worship. You remember that Hestia wasn't just the goddess of hearths. She was also tied to the idea of xenia, sacred hospitality. The idea that every guest should be treated with honor, every host with gratitude. Zeus got most of the credit for this, but it was Hestia who made the guest room warm, the bread fresh, and the wine not too watered down. There's a quirky tale, not widely known, about a traveler who entered a humble home and was offered nothing but stale barley cakes and tepid goat milk. But the hearth had been freshly swept, the fire warm, and the mat laid out with care. The traveler left a blessing anyway. "May your goats always give milk, and may your cakes stay just stale enough to teach humility." It's unclear whether this was a compliment or divine shade. You walk now through a quiet grove where the trees hum with insects and soft wind. You pass a small stone marked with an inscription barely legible. Here the fire stayed through the storm. No names, no dates, just that. You imagine a night long ago, rain like hammers, wind howling, and someone hunched over a hearth, shielding flame with their own body because to let it die would be more than just cold. It would be wrong. Hestia wasn't dramatic. She didn't throw lightning or seduce mortals or turn into birds for plot convenience. But she endured. Quietly. Constantly. The first and last to be honored at every ritual. The steady breath of warmth behind every door. She was present in thousands of lives, in thousands of ways, but almost never in spectacle. And yet, you find, that's what makes her so enduring. There's another stone bench nearby. You sit. The night deepens. A shepherd passes, humming something tuneless, his sheep obedient for once. The stars begin to show up, casually late but sparkling. Someone, somewhere, is lighting a hearth for the first time today. Someone else is banking the coals to last till dawn. All across the land, fires flicker into being, and in each one, a whisper of Hestia. You wonder how many prayers she's heard that started not with thunder, but with a sigh. How many offerings came wrapped in homespun linen and humble hope. Not for glory, but for peace. For calm. For the gentle rhythm of ordinary days. That's her magic, isn't it? Not in the flames themselves, but in what they represent. Safety. Continuity. The kind of warmth that seeps into your bones and whispers, "Stay." And perhaps that's why she gave up the throne. Thrones are for ruling. Hearths are for belonging. She chose the seat that's always waiting when you come home. You lean back, letting your eyes close for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, a fire crackles. Someone adds a log. Someone stirs stew. And in that quiet, in that constancy, you feel the shape of a goddess not in gold or marble, but in warmth. The stars overhead seem just a little brighter now, fewer clouds, perhaps, or maybe you're just noticing them because everything else has gone so blissfully quiet. Your thoughts feel like they've wrapped themselves in a heavy woolen cloak and curled up beside that memory of a hearth. But your feet continue on, as they always do, through a sleepy landscape of olive groves and stone footpaths worn smooth by centuries of sandals and goat hooves. There's a subtle rhythm to this walk now, the kind that sneaks into your body when you're not paying attention. A rustle here, a night bird there, the occasional hoot of an owl who sounds more nosy than wise. You follow this gentle trail until you arrive at a farmhouse, low-roofed and sun-baked, its outer walls painted with faded ochre patterns, protective spirals, wheat stalks, the odd fish. The door is ajar, and from within flickers the unmistakable glow of firelight. You step inside without knocking, because this is a dream, after all, and find a family gathered around their hearth. A grandmother knits with wool the color of apricots, a father mends a sandal, and 2 children lounge nearby, toasting figs on sticks over the fire. The room smells of thyme, smoke, and old wood warmed too many times to count. The hearth in this home is a shallow basin surrounded by stones blackened from use. Above it, a simple iron kettle hangs from a hook. This isn't decorative. This is the heart of the home, its pulse. And sitting beside it is a tiny, soot-covered figurine. Roughly shaped, not more than a hand-span tall, it's unmistakably a small likeness of Hestia, round face, long robe, hands clasped. No grand poses. No lightning bolts. Just presence. These little hearth statues were common once. Some were made of clay, others of bronze, and they weren't placed on pedestals. They lived in kitchens, tucked among the olive oil jars and onion strings. People left her bits of food, sprigs of herbs, even drops of wine. Not because they feared her wrath, but because they appreciated her company. Historians still argue whether Hestia ever had much of a formal cult. She didn't have a city-state devoted to her like Athena had Athens or Artemis had Ephesus. Instead, she belonged to everyone, and no one. A shared goddess. A guest in every home. Some scholars think this made her less important. Others argue it made her more beloved. After all, what's more powerful than being quietly essential? You sit with the family a while. They don't mind. In fact, the grandmother offers you a piece of flatbread that tastes of smoke and rosemary. One of the children hands you a fig, slightly charred and sticky sweet. The father raises his cup to you and mutters something that sounds like a blessing. Or maybe he's just thanking the fire for holding steady tonight. You could stay here forever. Honestly, you're already half considering it. The warmth, the rhythm, the scent of life being gently lived. But eventually, the fire settles into coals, and the family rises, each thanking the flame with a small bow and a few whispered words. You follow them outside, where they scatter a pinch of barley flour at the doorstep. It's a tiny gesture, easy to miss, but one rooted in old tradition. A gift to the goddess. A thank you that needs no flourish. You keep walking. The path now curves upward slightly, the stones colder underfoot. A wind picks up, dry and full of sagebrush. Ahead, the landscape opens to reveal a communal hearth, an ancient one, set in a circular stone clearing. You recognize it from stories, a prytaneon, one of the sacred public hearths where fire was kept burning continuously as a symbol of unity and protection. These communal hearths were serious business. Some were even used to light fires in newly founded colonies, carried across seas in carefully guarded embers. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was continuity, connection, identity. Imagine moving to a new land and kindling your first household flame from the sacred hearth of your homeland. That's how much people trusted Hestia to guard not just individual homes, but entire civilizations. You approach the prytaneon, now long abandoned. The fire pit is filled with leaves, and the stones have sunken like tired shoulders. Still, you sense it. That echo. That presence. Like Hestia never left, she just settled into the silence. Quirky fact: there's a myth where the Olympians all argue over which of them deserves the biggest sacrifices. Typical family dinner. While they bicker, Hestia calmly says she'll take whatever's left, whatever morsels people feel like giving. And because of this, she ends up receiving a little from everyone, all the time. The goddess of leftovers? Maybe. Or maybe the goddess who knew that quiet generosity lasts longer than flashy demands. A nightjar flutters overhead. A fox trots past, ignoring you entirely. You sit by the empty hearth and notice someone has scratched a phrase into one of the stones. The fire rests, but waits. You run your fingers across it, tracing the letters as if they might light up under your touch. You breathe in deeply. The air is cooler now, crisper. But you don't feel cold. You feel held. Your fingertips still tingle with the memory of that carved message. The fire rests, but waits. It hums in your chest like a lullaby too old for words. You rise slowly, brushing dew from your cloak that wasn't there before, and resume your journey, the stars still wheeling overhead in their quiet, celestial gossip. The path narrows, now edged by scrubby lavender and clusters of night thistles. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a goat sneeze, which feels oddly grounding. Ahead, tucked into a rise, you spot a curious little structure, half cave, half temple, lit from within by flickering orange light. It's humble, more like a shepherd's shrine than a deity's sanctuary. Yet the smell of roasted grain and beeswax tells you someone has been making offerings here. Inside, the ceiling is low and smoke-darkened. A single woman, elderly and smiling like someone who's seen too much to be startled by anything anymore, tends a small brazier. She nods once, then scoots over on her cushion, patting the spot beside her. You sit. Of course you do. She hums as she works, arranging bundles of herbs, stirring something thick and sweet-smelling in a clay pot, and feeding the brazier slivers of resinous wood. Every few minutes she sprinkles a pinch of something powdery into the flames, which spark gold and purple. You don't ask what it is. You suspect even she wouldn't give you a straight answer. This isn't a formal temple to Hestia. It's more of a kitchen temple hybrid, somewhere between a monk's study and a grandmother's pantry. Yet everything here feels steeped in devotion. You get the sense that this woman has been performing the same rituals for decades, possibly longer. And maybe, just maybe, she's not entirely mortal anymore. Historians still argue whether domestic worship like this ever counted as real religion. Ancient records favored big temples, fancy priests, and statues the size of amphorae. But there's a growing consensus that these small, local shrines, half prayer, half habit, were where the gods truly lived. Especially gods like Hestia, who thrived not on spectacle, but on steadiness. You help grind some herbs. The mortar is old and cracked, and the smell of sage fills your nose so completely it might replace a few brain cells. The woman chuckles softly at something, not at you, just in general, and pours you a small clay cup of barley tea so earthy it tastes like drinking history. She points at the brazier and murmurs, she's listening. You nod, even though no one said who she is. You both know. A fringe detail you remember now: in ancient Greece, whenever a new house was built, a sacred flame from the public hearth had to be brought into the new home to light its own. Not doing so wasn't just impolite, it was practically unpatriotic. Cities burned with shared identity, their fire a living connection. Some say these flames were never supposed to go out. But of course they did. They always do, eventually. Still, the memory of them lingers, like the faint warmth on a hearthstone long after the last coal fades. The woman gestures toward a carved niche in the wall. Inside it rests a small dish filled with oil, and floating in the oil is a burning wick. It casts a buttery glow, delicate and unwavering. You realize it's a candelian, a kind of perpetual lamp. You've seen them before in museums. But this one hasn't stopped burning. You don't ask how. Instead, you settle in beside it, gazing into the flame the way someone might stare at the sea, letting the movement of light trick your thoughts into dancing a little slower. She hands you a scroll. You open it. Inside, Recipes, prayers, maybe poetry. You can't read the writing, it's looping and archaic, but somehow, you understand it. It's not about language. It's about rhythm. Line after line flows with the cadence of morning routines and evening gratitude. It feels like sleep in script form. Quirky fact: Hestia never left Olympus in most versions of her myth. She didn't go on dramatic quests or instigate wars or turn anyone into anything unfortunate. She just stayed. Kept the hearth lit. Protected the threshold. She was the first to receive offerings and the last to leave the table. There are scholars who consider her the anti-hero of Olympus, resolutely undramatic in a pantheon that thrived on drama. You look around this flickering cave shrine and wonder how many people she's quietly comforted. Not with miracles or punishments, but with simple presence. With warmth. The woman finishes her tea and leans back against the wall. You mimic her posture, stretching your legs toward the brazier. It's a bit like being baked from the knees down, but in the nicest possible way. She smiles and closes her eyes. And you get the feeling she'll still be here when the stars burn out. Or maybe she is the stars. You're not entirely sure anymore, and you're not inclined to investigate further. Outside, the wind has died down, replaced by a stillness so profound it feels like the entire mountain is holding its breath. You step back into the night and glance over your shoulder. The cave glows faintly, like a lantern left out for travelers who've lost their way. You walk on, and the path opens into a small grove. Olive trees circle a flat stone platform, probably once used for rituals or dances, or both. You can almost hear the footsteps, soft and rhythmic, echoing off the moss-covered stones. You sit in the middle of the circle and light a twig from a leftover ember tucked in your pouch. Where did you get the ember? Don't ask silly questions. You light it, and it catches, and for a moment, the whole grove smells like rosemary and home. Then the twig burns out. But the warmth remains. You remain seated on the mossy stones of the grove, listening to nothing in particular, just the hush of night wrapped gently around you like a worn blanket. A cricket chirps once, then thinks better of it. Somewhere, a fox might be considering mischief, but even it seems hesitant to disturb this quiet. In the center of the olive-ringed clearing, that little ember from your mysterious pouch still smolders faintly on the edge of a flat stone, the last glow pulsing like a sleepy heartbeat. It's a strange comfort, proof that warmth doesn't always need to blaze. Sometimes it just needs to breathe. Your thoughts begin to wander, slowly and sleepily, to how the Greeks treated their fire-keeping rituals. Because here's something oddly charming. When travelers set out in the ancient world, they often brought embers from their home hearth along with them. Nestled in ash or moss inside a clay jar, these coals weren't just for cooking, they were a fragment of home. A pocket-sized identity. Like a warm version of carrying your Wi-Fi password across borders. You glance at your pouch again and wonder if maybe you've been carrying more than just flint and snacks. Historians still argue whether this practice was spiritual or simply practical. Fire, after all, wasn't easy to start in those days, not unless you had divine connections or an especially dramatic rock collection. But to Hestia's followers, it clearly meant more. Lighting a flame with foreign fire was frowned upon. There was something sacred in continuity. Something personal in sameness. As your fingers trace the cool etchings in the stone beneath you, a new figure emerges from the grove's far edge. A young girl in a saffron tunic, barefoot, balancing a ceramic bowl in one hand and a bundle of kindling in the other. She doesn't seem surprised to see you. Just curious, the way cats are. Without a word, she kneels beside the smoldering ember and adds a sprig of dried rosemary. It catches with a small sigh of smoke. Then she offers you the bowl. Inside, a soft, white cheese floating in oil, a few olives, and something bread-like that smells suspiciously like thyme and happiness. You nod in thanks, and she smiles, quick and lopsided, before turning back to the fire. She's methodical, building a new little blaze with all the care of someone tucking in a baby. Her hands don't shake. Her eyes don't blink. You get the sense she's done this many times before. And here's your quirky detail of the evening. Hestia had a cult following of young women, often those too quiet, too clever or too unfashionably steady for the flashier goddesses. They tended to the hearths in temples and homes alike, learning not just how to cook and clean, but how to keep everything else from unraveling. Imagine an elite order of ancient Girl Scouts with flame privileges and excellent pita recipes. You munch quietly as the new fire grows. It's mesmerizing, tiny flickers dancing between the olive branches overhead. You could almost believe the trees are leaning in to listen. The girl hums under her breath, not quite a song, more like a rhythm meant to guide the flames. It's repetitive, ancient, and oddly catchy. The kind of tune that ends up stuck in your head until at least next Thursday. You wonder how many such rituals have disappeared over time, not because they failed, but because they were too small, too personal, to ever be written down. People tend to record grand things, battles, dynasties, terribly expensive weddings. But who writes about the sacredness of lighting your evening lamp with your grandmother's coal? Or whispering a prayer into a spoonful of stew? Maybe that's why Hestia slipped through history's fingers. Not because she wasn't revered, but because she was everywhere, folded into daily life so thoroughly that no one thought to single her out. The girl finishes her kindling pyramid and places a little clay statuette next to the flame. It's rudimentary, maybe carved by a child, but unmistakably Hestia, cloaked, seated, holding a flame. No wild hair or weapons. Just calm and posture and presence. Offer something? She asks you, finally breaking the silence. You look around. No coins in your pocket. No wine, unless you count that suspicious fig thing you found 2 towns ago. But then you realize, the half-eaten olive loaf. You break a piece off and place it by the statue. It feels right. Not dramatic. Just fitting. The girl nods approval and leans back on her hands, eyes on the fire. She likes simple things, she murmurs. She watches quietly. You lie back beside her, watching the flames dance up toward a sliver of moon. There's a clarity to this moment, sharp and soft all at once. Like biting into something lemony on a warm day. Quirky aside, in some obscure corners of Hellenistic thought, Hestia wasn't just the goddess of the hearth, she was the hearth. Not metaphorically. Literally. The flame itself, the warmth, the center of the home. It's the sort of interpretation that makes you think differently the next time your stovetop clicks on or your candle flickers beside your bathtub. Your new friend, if that's what she is, she may also be a time ghost, and you're okay with either, begins to doze, head resting lightly on her arm. You stay awake a bit longer, just watching the fire sputter and listening to the crackle of burning rosemary. The smoke curls upward, vanishing into the silver sky. You think briefly about what it means to keep a flame alive, not just the literal kind, but the sort of flame that fuels patience, stillness, and care. The world doesn't reward those things very often. But here in this grove, under this moon, you feel like you've stumbled onto the forgotten backstage of mythology. And it smells like thyme and wood smoke. Eventually, the girl stirs, stands, and wanders off without a word. You don't follow. You just smile into the firelight. It's still warm. It always is. The embers remain long after the girl vanishes into the tree line. You lie on the mossy floor of the grove, belly content, limbs loose, and head surprisingly light, like someone gently unfastened the ropes around your worries and let them float off. The fire crackles softly beside you, whispering secrets in a language only the tired can understand. Still awake, but only just, you watch the flickering glow play across the little clay figure of Hestia. You've never really thought about what it would mean to worship a goddess whose whole personality could be summed up as delightfully stable. There are no whirlwind romances in her mythology, no raging storms or shape-shifting escapades. Hestia just tends. Quietly. Constantly. You rise slowly, the way you might ease out of a hot bath, and begin to wander through the grove. The trees thin out to reveal a dirt path, and like any dreamlike path worth your time, it leads to something both entirely unexpected and perfectly obvious, a small stone cottage with light spilling from the windows. You knock once, and the door opens, not because anyone answers, but because the latch never caught. Inside is warmth and spice and the unmistakable scent of lentils doing their best to become soup. A hearth anchors the room, its glow more inviting than any couch you've ever known. You step inside and find a small gathering, 4 or 5 figures seated around the fire, each with a bowl in hand, each utterly unbothered by your sudden appearance. Someone gestures to a bench. You sit. Another passes you a bowl. You don't even ask what's in it. You just eat. It tastes like calm. As the conversation murmurs around you, you begin to piece together a curious truth. These aren't just travelers or locals. They're keepers. Not priests exactly, but something adjacent. Watchers of flame. Stewards of warmth. Possibly also enthusiastic stewards of soup. Here's your historical fact for this stretch of the night. In many parts of the ancient Greek world, the communal hearth wasn't just a fire, it was a civic centerpiece. In every polis, the Prytanean housed the city's sacred flame, believed to have been lit from Hestia's eternal fire on Olympus. If that flame ever went out, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was seen as an omen. The ancient equivalent of a town's Wi-Fi going down and everyone immediately blaming Mercury in retrograde. A woman in a teal shawl nods toward the hearth. It needs tending, she says simply. And without question you rise. You find a log, slightly damp but eager, and nudge it into the coals. A flurry of sparks leaps skyward. The others smile. Apparently you've done it right. Or maybe the test was simply whether you cared enough to try. You sit again, now included. Most people forget she was first, someone says, voice low. Before all the others. When the thrones were handed out, she got hers before even Poseidon. This sparks murmured agreement, and a few sleepy sips of broth. And here's your quirky tidbit. Hestia was, in fact, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea. That's right. Before Zeus was launching lightning bolts or Athena was avoiding RSVPing to Mount Olympus Regers, Hestia was quietly entering the world and immediately being swallowed whole by her dad. Classic Cronus. But here's the twist, she was also the last to be released. Which means she was technically both the firstborn and the youngest of the gods. A chronological pretzel that only a mythologist, or maybe a sleep-deprived librarian, could truly enjoy. Historians still argue whether Hestia voluntarily gave up her throne, murmurs an older man, running his fingers along the rim of his bowl. Or if she was gently pressured out by flashier divinities. Dionysus needed a seat, after all. And who could deny a party god in need? The others laugh softly. It's the kind of laugh that doesn't challenge the story, just cushions it. You can picture the divine conference table, 12 thrones, 1 missing chair, and Hestia smiling faintly as she steps back. I'll stand, she probably said. Or maybe, more to the point, I'll stir the soup. Because that was the thing about Hestia. She didn't need a throne to matter. She was the hearth. Wherever warmth gathered, wherever stories were told or meals were shared, she was present. Your own bowl now empty, you let it rest beside your feet and gaze again into the fire. The others do the same. No one speaks for a long while. The flames speak for them. They pop and hiss and breathe. Eventually, someone pulls out a lyre and plucks a slow, uneven tune. It's not polished, but it's honest. You close your eyes, letting the notes drip through your ears like honey. Somewhere behind your closed lids, you imagine the great halls of Olympus, not the marble glamour ones, but the kitchens. The corners. The quiet places where sandals were left by the door and tea brewed long after the official banquets ended. You think about Hestia moving through those spaces, unseen but unmistakable. Every fire she tended a prayer. Every loaf she warmed a gift. And that, you realize, is the secret. While the others were claiming symbols, lightning, owls, seas, moons, Hestia chose presence. Not power. Not spectacle. Just the gentle gravity of staying. You open your eyes to find the others have drifted to sleep where they sat, heads bowed, bowls tilted, firelight curling around them like a sleepy cat. You lie back, cushioned by warmth and bread and myth. Outside, the grove waits. But in here, the flame keeps watch. The cottage settles into a rhythm now, the kind that only exists when nothing is expected of you. The fire flickers like it has nowhere better to be, and the air smells faintly of sage and old wood. You stretch out your legs beside the hearth, feeling the last of the day's tension dissolve like sugar in warm tea. Time passes, but not in any measurable sense. It just drifts. Which, if you've been paying attention, is very on brand for a goddess who didn't mind giving up Olympus real estate for some peace and quiet. You rise again, eventually, and step back into the night. The grove hums with a kind of holy silence. Not empty, but full of possibility. The kind of stillness that makes you want to whisper, even if there's no one around to hear. There's a narrow trail ahead, worn into the earth by feet that didn't mind mud or moss. You follow it, because of course you do. Because every path in these stories leads somewhere worth dreaming about. And tonight's path leads to a temple. Or maybe a kitchen disguised as one. It's small by godly standards, no towering columns or singing marble statues, just a round, open-air structure with smooth stone benches and a fire pit at the center. A few clay amphories sit tucked in an alcove, sealed with wax and patience. You step inside and feel it instantly. The weight of every quiet prayer ever mumbled over soup, every wish stirred into porridge, every thank you whispered as bread rose perfectly golden. This isn't just Hestia's temple, it's her timeline. A living museum of ordinary miracles. Mainstream fact time: Hestia's worship was unusual compared to most Olympians. She didn't have grand festivals or flashy temples. Instead, her domain was domestic and continuous. Every private hearth was her altar. Every flame that cooked dinner or warmed toes in winter was a tribute. She wasn't worshipped in spectacle, she was worshipped in habits. Which, let's be honest, is a big win for introverts everywhere. The temple glows with amber light, and you notice something charming. Carved along the base of the central fire pit are tiny figures, children playing, women kneading dough, old men dozing in chairs. No warriors, no winged horses. Just the stuff of days. Someone once spent a lot of time on this carving. Probably with a very pointy tool and not nearly enough light. But they understood the brief. This goddess didn't need glory. She needed company. You sit by the pit and stir the coals with a slender iron rod. They respond with a soft puff of heat and the distinct aroma of yesterday's meal. There's a leftover onion skin curling in the ash. Somehow, it feels like part of the ritual. Quirky tidbit incoming: in some versions of ancient Greek hearth rituals, families would take a portion of their fire when moving to a new home, literally carrying a live coal wrapped in ceramic or ash, so Hestia would come along. Like spiritual Tupperware. The thought makes you smile. Imagine moving into a modern apartment and having to explain the smoking jar in your backpack. Oh, this? It's just my immortal flame of household harmony. Also, can you help me find an outlet? You rise and begin exploring the edges of the temple. Along one wall is a series of shelves, on them offerings. Not gold or gems or epic weapons, but simple things: bundles of dried lavender, half a loaf of honeyed bread, a well-worn apron folded just so. There's even a child's drawing, charcoal on bark, of a hearth with hearts above it. It's not great art, but it's excellent sincerity. And here comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Hestia's minimalism was a sign of her fading popularity, or a testament to her enduring relevance. Did the lack of temples mean she was forgotten, or was it that her essence was too woven into daily life to require monumental shrines? You can see both sides. But as you lean against a smooth pillar and let the warmth seep into your bones, you're inclined to think she simply never needed applause. Some gods roar. Others simmer. From somewhere unseen, you hear a familiar clinking sound. It takes a moment to place it: cutlery. There's a kitchen nearby. And where there's a kitchen, there is tea. You follow the sound, turning a corner into a cozy annex you somehow missed before. Inside, there's a low table, a steaming pot, and an elderly woman in a saffron shawl, humming as she pours 2 cups. She gestures and you sit. The tea smells like lemon verbena and stories. She doesn't speak, which you appreciate deeply. Words feel heavy now, like lifting rocks when you only need to drift. You sip. It's exactly the right temperature. Exactly the right taste. You're not even sure that's possible, but here we are. She slides something across the table. A scroll? A map? No, just a list. Scrawled in gentle ink it reads: feed the fire. Thank the quiet. Share the seat. Leave no dishes. You nod. Not because you fully understand, but because it feels like a good list. And here's a thought you didn't expect to have: Hestia may not have built an empire, but she built something else. A culture. One of patience, and care, and firelight flickering on stone. You finish your tea. The woman smiles and vanishes, yes, vanishes, though in the least dramatic way possible. One blink and she's gone, as if she simply stepped out of the narrative. You're alone again, but not lonely. The coals still burn. The temple still breathes. And somewhere beyond this warm, circular world, a new fire waits to be lit. You stay seated for a while, mostly because it feels like the only reasonable thing to do in a place that expects so little from you. The fire doesn't demand your attention. The walls don't echo your footsteps with dramatic purpose. Even the scroll of hearthside wisdom is content to lie quietly, unbothered by your slow comprehension. Eventually you stand, not because you're in a rush, but because you've begun to feel a gentle pull. Not forward, exactly, and certainly not upward. More like inward. As though something deeper in this place is gently asking to be noticed. You step past the annex and follow a winding corridor, carved not from stone, but from earth itself. The air smells like warm dust and rosemary. Roots tangle above your head, like the temple has grown down instead of up. You reach a circular chamber. In the center, another hearth, smaller than before. Not blazing, but steady. Around it, a series of stools, short, uneven, clearly made for conversation rather than posture. This is not a temple. It's a kitchen disguised as a shrine, or maybe the other way around. Sitting on one of the stools is a young woman with ash-streaked hands and a brow furrowed in concentration. She's kneading dough in a wide wooden bowl, and humming a tune that makes your brain go, "Have I heard this in a dream?" She looks up briefly, nods once, and goes back to kneading. You sit across from her. She doesn't speak, and again, you are absurdly grateful. Her dough is simple: flour, water, oil, and something that smells faintly of anise. She folds, presses, turns. It's rhythmic. Hypnotic. You're watching a ritual, not a recipe. And yes, this is your mainstream fact: ancient Greek kitchens were spiritual as well as functional. Hestia's presence meant that every meal, no matter how humble, was an act of devotion. Families often offered the first bite of bread or a splash of wine to the fire before taking any themselves. Here, food wasn't just fuel. It was gratitude in edible form. You lean back and study the chamber. On one wall, a set of clay plates with etched names. Perhaps they belonged to previous caretakers. Perhaps they're still here, just baking in the next room. Either way, there's a sense of lineage, an unbroken chain of quiet competence passed down through cinnamon rolls and lentil stew. And now for your fringe tidbit: some myths claim that Hestia could be summoned not through incense or blood sacrifice, but by simply cleaning your house and lighting a candle. No thunderclaps. No divine paperwork. Just order and flame. Frankly, she sounds like the original minimalist influencer. There's movement beside you. The baker has finished her dough and is now shaping it into spirals, pressing each one with her thumb before setting it onto a stone tray. You ask if you can help, not out loud, of course, just with the international language of hesitant gesturing. She smiles. Hands you a lump. And suddenly, you are making bread with a woman who may or may not be a figment of divine hospitality. Your spirals aren't perfect. One looks like a sleeping ferret. Another resembles a sad question mark. She nods anyway. Approval here is gentle, not grated. She places the tray near the hearth. Not in it, just near it. The stones will warm the dough slowly, coaxing it rather than searing it. You didn't realize bread could feel coddled, but here we are. She stands, brushes her hands clean, and disappears into another passage, leaving you alone with the scent of flour and faint sweetness. The bread puffs slightly, like it's sighing in its sleep. You think again about Hestia, this soft-spoken goddess of warm toes and shared leftovers. Historians still argue whether her near absence from the more dramatic myths is evidence of her diminished role, or her elevated one. Was she written out because she was too boring? Or too sacred to trivialize? Either way, she endured. Long after temples crumbled and myths got messy, Hestia remained wherever people bothered to set a table. The dough is nearly ready now. You don't eat it, not yet. Something about the moment says, wait for the next part. And so you do. Across from you sits a basket. You hadn't noticed it before. Inside, a small jar of honey, a ceramic cup of warm milk, and a folded cloth. Not a feast. Not even a snack, really. But exactly enough. You smile. Because now you get it. Hestia didn't ask for thrones or temples. She asked for presents. She asked for people to stop, notice, tend. She didn't rule Olympus, she reminded it to pause for tea. You wrap the cloth around the bread and rise, leaving the chamber the way you found it, warm, quiet, smelling faintly of dreams and dinner. Back outside, the grove has shifted again. It's darker, but not frightening. Stars blink above in that ancient way that says we've seen worse. You sit on a low stone wall and unwrap the bread. It's still warm. You tear a piece, dip it in honey and taste. And friends, it's perfect. Not mind-blowing. Not transcendent. Just right. Which is its own kind of miracle. You sit a little longer than expected, chewing slowly, not just because the bread is good, which it is, but because something about this moment seems unfairly rare. It's not often that you get to eat something made by hand, in silence, beneath stars, without a single notification ping or background hum of civilization poking at your piece. The last bite lingers. Sweet, a little earthy. The sort of flavor that probably doesn't translate well to mass production. Not because the ingredients are complex, but because it was made with exactly zero rush. You stretch, your body not quite eager to move but not ready to sleep either. The grove still hums with quiet presence, like it's waiting. So you rise and wander. There's a narrow footpath now, dappled with moonlight and interrupted occasionally by roots that politely suggest you pay attention. You step over each with care, a rhythm forming in your stride, like the forest is keeping pace with you. There are no gods here, no monsters or myths clawing at the shadows, just the hush of leaves and the low rustle of wind through laurel branches. Eventually, the trees part again, and you find yourself in front of something unexpectedly architectural. A colonnade carved into the hillside, barely noticeable unless you were looking. The pillars are smooth and worn, the kind of worn that whispers centuries. You step inside. This is not a grand temple. No gold, no marble. It's more like a tucked-away archive, a place where quiet things live. You run your fingers along the grooves in the wall, each one holding small clay tablets, stacked neatly in rows. Not scrolls. Not myths. Recipes. And just like that, you've discovered the sacred cookbook. Turns out, worshipping Hestia wasn't always hymns and oaths. Sometimes, it was just making sure your soup didn't curdle. These tablets, hundreds of them, record the kind of details only a truly domestic goddess would care about. How many figs to soak for winter bread, which herbs keep lentils from getting sulky, and the proper order of mixing honey and goat's milk for stomach troubles. Your mainstream historical fact tonight? Yes, the ancient Greeks kept household recipe records, often passed down through generations or stored in temples where priestesses kept both the hearth and the knowledge warm. These weren't just recipes. They were survival manuals, family lore, edible comfort passed along with calloused hands and unspoken love. As you move deeper into the colonnade, you spot a series of painted panels. Not heroic murals, mind you. No Medusa slaying, no Dionysian revels. Just scenes of people cooking. A girl stirring a pot while staring dreamily into the steam. An older man slicing onions like it's a competitive sport. A dog curled beside a hearth, snoring with impressive volume. One panel, off to the side, is especially curious. A depiction of Hestia herself, not in radiant armor or towering splendor, but seated on a low stool, elbows on her knees, smiling faintly as she watches a young couple burn their stew. In her hand, a spoon. Your fringe tidbit for the evening? There's an obscure thread in Hellenistic poetry suggesting that Hestia sometimes appeared as an elderly neighbor offering unsolicited advice. She'd knock, sniff the pot, and suggest just a pinch more time, then vanish before the couple realized they just received divine culinary consultation. Honestly, you're now imagining Zeus being scolded over underseasoned beans. You chuckle. Quietly, because even here, the air feels like a library. Toward the back of the space, there's a wooden bench, slightly crooked, wonderfully inviting. You sit, and a faint creaking sigh escapes from the wood. It sounds a bit like, finally, someone appreciates me. Above your head, an oil lamp flickers, casting soft arcs of gold onto the stone. Motes of dust float lazily, like fireflies that lost track of their schedules. And there, in the quiet, you reflect, not in a grand, cinematic way, but the way you do when your brain is finally tired of being clever. Historians still argue whether Hestia's absence from major stories was a sign of her decline or proof of her quiet supremacy. After all, while Zeus thundered and Poseidon stormed, Hestia never lost her temple. Never started a war. Never had a scandalous romance involving swans or golden showers. She simply stayed. That's the word, isn't it? Stayed. In a world of chaos and ego and metamorphosis, Hestia remained. The hearth was always lit. The bread always rising. The chair always open. You lean back. It's not exciting. It's not loud. But maybe, just maybe, it's the thing most worth preserving. And as your eyelids flutter just slightly, because yes, the bench is comfortable, and yes, the lamp's glow is warm enough to dissolve your to-do list, you catch one more detail on the painted wall. A little boy handing a bowl to a stranger. A gesture so simple it's easy to miss. But that's the thing about Hestia. She doesn't demand attention. She just waits for you to notice. You don't move for a while. The bench beneath you is crooked in that perfect way, like it's been molded subtly by 100 thoughtful sitters before you. You could almost imagine them now, monks, travelers, sleepy poets, people who wandered in, not looking for miracles or revelations, but just a quiet moment near a warm light. Outside the colonnade, the forest continues its nighttime whispering. A soft breeze sends the scent of dried herbs drifting in, rosemary, maybe thyme, and something that smells faintly of warm ash. You close your eyes for a blink that lasts far too long, then open them again with a slow breath. You're not asleep. Just very nearly. But the path calls again, so you rise. The night feels softer now, like it's exhaled. You step out into the hush and begin following the footpath again. It leads downhill, toward a cluster of low buildings that nestle like sleepy cats against the edge of a slope. And nestled in the middle is what appears to be a shrine, not large or elaborate, but unmistakably dedicated to Hestia. There's a perpetual flame glowing in a shallow bronze basin. It doesn't crackle or leap. It glows steadily, like a nap in fire form. A priestess, barefoot and robed in simple saffron linen, tends the flame with the kind of reverence usually reserved for opera arias or particularly tricky soufflés. She doesn't notice you. Or maybe she does, and simply approves of your silence. This brings us to a useful historical fact. In many Greek city-states, there was a public hearth at the center of civic life. The fire was never allowed to go out. Not because people were afraid of being chilly, but because it symbolized continuity. When cities were founded, settlers would bring embers from their home's hearth to kindle a new one. That tiny flame carried everything: memory, hope, the illusion of control over things like fate and weather. You pause near the edge of the shrine. There are offerings here, nothing lavish. A small woven basket of figs, a polished pebble. A folded cloth. The sort of gifts you give someone who already has everything they need. The priestess adds another twist of resin to the flame and hums a quiet note. It's not melodic, exactly, more like the kind of tune you find yourself humming without realizing. A tone passed down like a hand-me-down cloak, softened by centuries of use. There's a low stone wall nearby, and you settle onto it to watch. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because, for the first time in a while, you don't feel rushed to look away. And while you're sitting there, drifting somewhere between observation and reverie, you remember another oddity from your mental attic of forgotten facts. In some regions, Hestia was invoked before every meal and every important decision, not after, like a divine afterthought, but first. Before speeches, treaties, journeys? Not because she'd make them exciting, but because she'd make them safe. Your quirky tidbit? The ancient Greeks had a saying, begin with Hestia. It wasn't just literal, it became shorthand for beginning anything with calm, structure, and warmth. One scholar speculated it was the classical equivalent of take a breath. Another countered that it was more like make sure the kettle's on. Historians still argue whether this reverence for Hestia was mostly symbolic, or if it actually changed behavior. Did her constant presence encourage domestic harmony? Or was she simply a reminder to not burn the stew while arguing about politics? Either way, her flame flickered through homes and halls alike, an eternal do not disturb sign for the soul. The flame's glow deepens as more resin is added, and the air takes on a sleepy sweetness. You realize you've been watching it for nearly an hour without once checking a clock. And isn't that the point? You think about fire differently now. Not as danger or spectacle, but as continuity. You imagine being a child in ancient Greece, watching your mother stir the coals in the morning, whispering a little thank you to the invisible guest who kept the home warm while everyone slept. You think about how modern life rarely leaves room for such quiet rituals. Sure, we have microwaves and thermostats, but they don't glow in the same way. They don't sigh softly in the corner of the room like a cat that's heard all your secrets. Maybe that's why Hestia never needed myths with chariots or cursed monsters. Her myth was this moment. This flicker of light. This bench. This breath. A slight breeze curls past your cheek like a sleepy nod. You feel the weight of your limbs settle a little deeper into the stone, and even your thoughts seem reluctant to keep standing. As you rise to go, the priestess glances your way and nods, just once. Not as if to say you are welcome, but more like you've understood. It feels strangely validating. You follow a different path now, one that curves around the edge of the village. A few homes glow faintly with lamp light inside. One family eats a meal in near silence, a little girl lighting a taper with careful pride. Across the way, a couple sits on their doorstep, wrapped in a blanket, quietly watching the moon. You walk past like a ghost with warm feet. And slowly, you realize Hestia wasn't just goddess of the hearth. She was goddess of these exact moments. Of quietly tending. Of lingering. Of knowing that not everything needs to be loud to be sacred. You stop once more beneath an olive tree. The moonlight pools at your feet like spilled cream. And for the first time tonight, you feel something shift, not like a plot twist, but like a door creaking open in your chest. You're not quite asleep. But you're not far off. You keep walking, though slowly now, as if each step weighs just slightly less than the one before. The path isn't marked, but your feet seem to know where to go. That happens sometimes when the night is quiet and the stories have soaked into your bones. Somewhere behind you, the flame at Hestia's shrine still flickers on. But ahead lies something different, a different kind of hearth. A communal one, built not of bricks or bronze, but of stories, of conversations shared over bowls of lentil stew and roughly cut bread. You find yourself drawn to the agora, the gathering space of the town. Even at night, there's a low murmur here, the leftovers of the day's hum. Not far from the center, a group of elders sits under a vine-covered trellis. They've long since finished eating, and now they're simply existing, poking at memories, sipping at watered wine, speaking in a rhythm that requires no urgency. You drift closer, unnoticed but welcome. One of the elders is recounting the story of Prometheus, but not the flashy version with fire and punishment. No, this is the tale of how Prometheus once taught a village to bake bread using sun-heated stones. The kind of myth that never makes it into epics, but you wish it would. This is a good moment to pause on something historians do agree on. Much of Greek mythology wasn't just for drama or worship, it was practical. Gods and heroes were woven into farming techniques, cooking tips, even child-rearing advice. The myths were the ancient equivalent of life hacks, but with more poetic metaphors and significantly more goats. And the myths of Hestia? They're quiet too. Some say she never left Olympus at all. Others claim she wandered through villages in disguise, checking on hearths the way a grandmother might peek into a kitchen just to see that the pot wasn't boiling over. One charming fringe belief, likely only held by a few rural families, claimed that Hestia could be found in a flicker of fire that leaned leftward at night. They'd greet the flame with a welcome, auntie, and leave a crumb of barley cake beside the coals. Just in case. Scholars still debate whether Hestia's role was primarily symbolic, an idealized image of domesticity, or whether she was the subtle glue that held the spiritual life of a household together. Unlike Zeus with his thunder or Artemis with her arrows, Hestia offered no spectacle. Her mythos wasn't about awe, it was about ease. Which, ironically, makes her the most human of the Olympians. She asked nothing but to be remembered, fed a little smoke, and allowed to stay near. You settled beside a column at the edge of the agora, a quiet shadow among shadows. The conversation continues around you, meandering like a slow river through memories and half-remembered poems. Someone quotes Hesiod, someone else snorts in disagreement. The moon is high now, its light silvering the leaves of the vine above you. They shimmer just enough to hold your gaze without asking anything in return. You notice someone stoking a brazier at the center of the gathering, probably just to keep the chill off. But there's something ritual in the way he does it, not rushed, not lazy. He arranges the coals like a chess player plotting 6 moves ahead. And when the warmth rises, everyone leans in just slightly, not even thinking about it. You find yourself doing the same. It strikes you that hearths, whether private or public, were never just about cooking. They were about gravity. They kept people centered. Around them, life organized itself, like shoes by a front door or cats near a sunbeam. You can almost hear a modern voice in your head asking, but wasn't that limiting? Didn't it trap people, especially women, into a role they didn't choose? And sure, that's fair. But Hestia's throne wasn't given. It was offered, and refused. That part matters. She gave it up for something quieter, something steadier. She chose the hearth over the throne. The corner over the spotlight. In a world of dramas and divine drama queens, she chose consistency. Someone nearby yawns deeply, the kind of yawn that pulls a little sigh with it, and you suddenly feel it, too. A soft thud of sleepiness against your ribcage. But not quite yet. You let the feeling spread slowly, like honey melting in warm tea. As the elders chuckle at something indecipherable, your gaze drifts to the sky again. Stars still scatter above, timeless and unbothered. No sign of the gods tonight, but perhaps that's the whole idea. Maybe Hestia's magic was that she never needed to be seen. Her flame was there whether you noticed or not. And isn't that a comfort? You close your eyes for a long blink again. Just a moment. In the distance, a donkey brays once and then seems to regret it. Somewhere, a child's lullaby threads through an open window. Everything hums at the same frequency now. One tuned to warmth and repetition and the slow erosion of urgency. A breeze brushes past your ear like someone whispering, "Stay a little longer." You do. You imagine your own hearth now, if you had one here. A low fire, a squat kettle, maybe a stool with a cushion just slightly too thin. Nothing glamorous. Just enough. You'd put a loaf of bread by the coals, maybe. A folded note for no one in particular. A chipped mug still warm. And perhaps a flicker of fire, leaning left. It's getting harder to tell where your thoughts end and the story begins. Everything is slow now. Not sluggish, just softened. Like fabric worn smooth at the elbows, or dough after the second rise. You stretch your legs out in the dust beneath you, feeling the slight crunch of dry leaves and pebbles. Someone near you coughs slightly, then settles back again. In this rhythm, it's easy to imagine what a day in Hestia's temple might have looked like. Not the grand kind, there were a few, but the smaller ones, tucked beside marketplaces or along rural roads. Modest little sanctuaries, just big enough for a few benches and a flame kept burning behind a half-circle of stones. You'd arrive in the morning, perhaps with a few lentils or a tiny pinch of dried rosemary. Nothing flashy. Just something to toss into the fire. Not because you expected anything in return, but because you appreciated the quiet company. Hestia didn't do favors like Poseidon or threaten plagues like Apollo. She just stayed where she was and warmed the room. You think about how many prayers were whispered to her not as pleas, but as thanks. Let this stew not burn. Let the baby sleep through the night. Let the roof stay on. All profoundly unpoetic, and yet probably more heartfelt than most of the big epic oaths. Historians still debate whether Hestia ever had a truly independent cult following. Some argue she was just a side character, more symbol than presence. Others believe her simplicity was precisely what made her central. She didn't need theatrical temples or festivals full of screaming goats. Her shrine was your kitchen. Her altar was your firewood pile. And yet, for a goddess who gave up her seat at the high table, she stuck around a lot longer than many Olympians. Roman Vestal virgins kept her flame burning centuries after other gods had faded into polite museum labels. That's saying something. There's a story, definitely on the fringe, about how Hestia once disguised herself as a baker's wife in a busy port city. She spent 40 years anonymously making barley bread and comforting neighbors with quiet tea and extremely blunt advice. When she left, they said the whole district smelled like cinnamon for a week. You're pretty sure this one came from a poet who got too attached to their landlord, but still. It's a nice image. You stir a little on your bench, imagining what you'd ask Hestia if she happened to wander by tonight. Probably nothing grand. Maybe something like, "Can I just rest a while longer?" And you suspect she'd nod and sit beside you. Not answer. Just keep you company. The agora has quieted even more now. A few figures shuffle home, and the last of the wine is being poured out in ceremonial sips for the earth. You think again of candle clocks, of monks and flame measuring and wax-marked hours ticking away. The ancient version of time wasn't precise, but it was poetic. Time as flickering light, as something melting slowly into darkness. And Hestia would have liked that. The hearth, after all, is one of humanity's first timekeepers. Meals follow firelight. Days end when coals cool. Even now, your body knows this rhythm. You're starting to yawn before you even register why. Still, there's one more turn before sleep, one more soft stone to step on in this myth-soaked wander. A few feet away, a child is lighting a small clay lamp. The flame wavers and then steadies, casting a little bubble of gold on the dirt. Her mother, barefoot and still wearing the apron of a potter, leans down to shield the light. They nod to the fire, then each other, then quietly leave. No one speaks. But the act is familiar. You recognize it as a ritual, not grand, not official, but one passed down like a recipe or a lullaby. That's the thing about Hestia. She didn't need temples with marble columns. Her presence lived in habits. In patterns. In people remembering to light a flame before walking home. You think of the things you do without thinking. Boiling tea, fluffing pillows, turning the same light off last every night. Rituals, all of them. Maybe not sacred, but deeply personal. And suddenly you wonder how many of them are your way of keeping a hearth goddess close. Even if you didn't know you were doing it. You rise slowly. Your back protests a bit, and your knees crack just enough to remind you that time hasn't paused completely. You stretch, letting your arms float upward, fingers wiggling toward a fig tree's low branch. Then you walk. Not far, just back toward the shrine's direction. You're not even sure why. There's nothing urgent to do there. No prayer you forgot. Maybe you just like the idea that someone, somewhere, is tending the fire. A soft thud of footsteps beside you. Another wanderer? Or maybe no one at all. The path glows just faintly in the starlight now, like cooled embers. You follow it. If Hestia is watching, you hope she's not grading your posture. The path curls a little, hugging the edge of a quiet hill. You step around a tuft of wild thyme and notice how the night air shifts here, less perfumed with city warmth, more like crushed leaves and damp stone. Somewhere off to your right, an owl mutters something cryptic and immediately loses interest in you. Fair enough. You think back, not to grand myths with sword fights and chariot crashes, but to simpler stories, the ones people don't write down in epic verse. Like the legend of the pebble oven. Supposedly, in a tiny hillside village, a temple to Hestia was once so poor they couldn't afford actual firewood. So the villagers gathered pebbles, heated them under the sun all day, and piled them in an oven to hold the warmth into evening. When night came, they'd bake flatbread and whisper thanks to the goddess who had taught them to keep each other warm without flame. Historians still argue whether this oven actually existed, or whether it was just a metaphor tucked into a traveler's tale. But you can't help picturing it anyway: sun-warmed stones, bread steaming faintly, and someone kneeling to stir coals that don't exist. It would have made her smile, that kind of creativity. Hestia didn't ask for extravagance. In a pantheon packed with thunderbolts and golden armor, she was content with hospitality and quiet diligence. And this is important, she never tried to make it look glamorous. She let comfort be plain. You step again, slowly, catching the faint warmth of your own breath in the cool night. There's no rush. The hill crests ahead, dotted with scrubby trees and the pale outline of another small shrine, this one half sunken into the slope. A few beeswax candles still flicker inside, shielded from the breeze by little clay windbreaks. You wander in. Not because you must. Just because it's there. The floor is stone, uneven but warm in a dreamlike way. There are offerings on the side, dried figs, a crust of barley loaf, a sprig of rosemary. No gold. No blood. Just food and herbs and a fire that hasn't gone out yet. You kneel, again, not for ritual, but because it's easier than standing. The warmth is soft and slow, licking at your cheeks and wrists like a cat settling in your lap. You understand, now more than ever, why this goddess never needed much of a legend. She was the ritual. The steady presence that didn't ask questions or keep score. You light one of the stubby candles, mostly for yourself. The flame sputters and then steadies. You find yourself mumbling something under your breath. Not a prayer. More of a recipe, actually. It just slips out, 2 parts flour, 1 part water, a pinch of salt. You chuckle softly. Even your spontaneous offerings are edible. They'd have liked that in the old villages. There was once, apparently, a whole competition in a coastal town over who could bake the most Hestia-approved bread. No spices, no sugar, just warmth and humility. The winner's prize? A new oven brick and the right to tend the village flame for a year. Some say Hestia judged the contest herself, disguised as an elderly neighbor with opinions about yeast. Others say she sent a goat who sat beside the right loaf and bleated once. Nobody agrees, but all versions involve the winner being humble enough to share their recipe. You lean against the wall now, half reclined, arms folded. The candlelight dances across the ceiling in slow, golden flickers. It's all so quiet that even the small pop of resin in the flame feels like a bell. You think about thrones. Olympian ones. Lavish, gold-leafed monstrosities with lions carved into the legs and footstools shaped like clouds. Hestia had one once. But she gave it up, not out of weakness, but to make space. You suspect she found her real seat later, right where you're sitting now. On warm stone. Near a slow flame. Surrounded by food and silence, and maybe a goat or two, if she was feeling festive. And honestly? That sounds better than a throne. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to listen better. There's a soft clatter outside, like a small amphora being set down gently on the ground. Maybe someone else has come to visit the shrine. You don't check. It's not your job to guard the flame. Just to sit with it. The wind sighs low outside. The candles flutter, and then recover. A beetle trundles across your boot, hesitates at the heel, and decides against climbing. Good call. You rest your hands on your knees and think of all the ways people have honored silence. How many stories begin with chaos and noise, but end in hush. Like this one. Because even though you're still technically awake, your thoughts are starting to fold in on themselves. Not sharply. More like napkins at a well-set table. Neat little creases, ready for something comforting. The candle next to you shortens by another inch. Someone left a note under a small stone, illegible now, but you like to believe it was just a reminder, remember to breathe. Hestia would approve. You shift slightly. The fire crackles. Your knees don't even protest this time. Stillness suits you. The floor under your legs hums faintly with retained heat. Not hot, just the kind of warmth that says someone was here not long ago. You can almost picture them, another traveler, another sleepless thinker, someone with aching knees or a head full of plans they never quite finished. Maybe they lit the same candle you're watching now. Maybe they sat just as quietly, tracing cracks in the stone with a callous finger. You stand slowly, bones creaking like old door hinges, though, to be fair, that might be the bench nearby, not you. The wind outside hasn't changed. Still soft, still tasting faintly of fennel and wood smoke. There's no one to say goodbye to, not really. Just the shrine, still holding its sleepy light. You nod once, the way you would to someone you respect but don't want to disturb. Back on the path, your feet fall into a rhythm. 1-2 scuff. 1-2 step. The kind of pacing that doesn't take effort, your body walking for the sake of it. It feels appropriate, given Hestia's preferred mode of transportation, none. She rarely wandered, never charged into battle, didn't throw herself into arguments. While the other gods turned themselves into bulls or swans or extremely confusing clouds, Hestia mostly stayed put. She didn't need to move to matter. The hearth made the home, and she was the hearth. Centered. Reliable. Warm. There's something deeply comforting about that. Like a kettle you forgot was whistling, but it doesn't boil over, it just waits patiently for you to notice. Down in the valley, tiny lights begin to wink on in homes and inns and half-forgotten temples. The sort of places where people mutter goodnight while checking that the embers haven't gone out. The kind of places Hestia liked best. You pass one cottage with smoke curling lazily from a chimney and a hen perched on the windowsill. Inside, someone hums while stirring something thick and fragrant. Stew, maybe? Or mulled wine. You get about 4 steps past it before the smell hooks your memory and reels you back to an old story, less heroic epic, more domestic legend. It goes like this: in a storm-racked village, a small hearth fire was the only thing that never went out. Through floods, lightning, and what was described as a very angry meal, that one flame flickered calmly. When the villagers investigated, they found a young girl kneeling beside it, shielding the flame with her shawl. Hestia, of course, in disguise. And when they offered her food or coin, she only asked for a place to sit and a chance to stir the pot. The pot, in this case, being an actual soup. Historians still argue whether this tale was meant to be literal, symbolic, or simply a clever way to explain how someone burned lentils for 6 hours and still earned divine praise. But it caught on. Even now, in remote villages, there's still a superstition that you shouldn't let your hearth fire die during a storm. Just in case she's watching. Or sitting nearby with a ladle and a polite cough. You turn left at a fork in the path, guided by nothing more than a vague sense of maybe this way. The stars overhead look like spilled millet seeds. There's no moon tonight, just the kind of velvet darkness that swallows outlines and gently rounds every shape into probably not a goat. Eventually you come across a low stone wall. Beyond it, a flat clearing marked by old pillars and even older moss. Another shrine. This one is clearly abandoned, roof collapsed inward, ivy threading its way through the cracks like it's trying to sew the place shut. You don't go in. It doesn't feel necessary. But you do pause, leaning against the wall, watching fireflies dance in slow arcs. The whole scene hums with the particular magic of things left alone. Hestia was never flashy. She wasn't dramatic about exits. When she gave up her throne, she didn't slam any doors or compose a strongly worded poem about it. She just stepped back, made space, and carried her fire into quieter places. Let the others chase storms and justice and love affairs with swans. She had bread to bake. And perhaps that's why she became everyone's favorite by being no one's favorite. She didn't ask. She was just there. You sit again, back to the stone, and think about how many homes have known a version of her. In stories, yes, but also in practice. The aunt who always keeps tea warm. The neighbor who checks your firewood before winter. The stranger who leaves a candle lit in a wayside chapel, just in case someone comes by. You wonder how many of those people knew they were echoing a goddess. The stars shift slightly. Or maybe it's just your eyes adjusting. You realize you're not cold anymore, not because the air changed, but because your thoughts did. Somewhere between the candle and the soup story and the memory of bread baking contests, you've warmed from the inside out. That's her work, too. The invisible kind. You sigh, a long, slow breath that curls around your ribs and slips out through your nose like steam from a kettle. There's no music. No prophecy. No surprise lightning bolts. Just a low tick of silence settling into its favorite chair. And at the edge of the clearing, a faint trail glows where fireflies keep brushing the same spot, like someone, long ago, used to walk that path every night. Maybe just to check the flame. Maybe just to sit and be still. You don't need to follow it. You already know where it leads. Back to warmth. Back to quiet. Back to the place in the story where nothing happens, and that's the point. You stretch your legs, bones echoing the shape of the bench you left behind. The gravel underfoot crunches with the same satisfying hush as stale bread being torn in half, a sound that somehow comforts, especially in stories like this. You're not in a hurry anymore, not with Hestia in your head. That's the thing about a goddess of stillness, she slows even your thoughts. You follow the trail, lined with moss-softened stones and overgrown thyme, your feet brushing past sleeping herbs that once flavored 1,000 quiet dinners. And now your mind drifts toward her actual worship, because yes, despite her modesty, Hestia had real temples. Not massive monuments, but circular hearth-centered sanctuaries where flames burned constantly, tended by women known for not talking much and for knowing exactly how long to steep barley water. Every city had one too. Even bustling Athens, where gossip traveled faster than chariots and gods tended to show up for dramatic monologues, made sure Hestia's flame stayed burning. She wasn't flashy, but she was necessary. In fact, any new colony that left the city had to take a bit of her fire with them, literally. A glowing ember, tucked carefully into a portable brazier, was part of the standard colonial packing list. Right between dried figs and spare sandals. Historians still argue whether those embers were ceremonial or practical. But it's kind of lovely either way. The idea of a city's heart traveling in a glowing coal, passed from one land to another. A slow-burning inheritance. You pass a tiny brook now, just wide enough to step over, the kind of stream frogs probably brag about navigating in their youth. The moonlight finally peeks out, turning the water into silver thread. And for a moment, your brain wonders if Hestia would enjoy this walk. Then you remember, probably not. She wouldn't need it. Her walk was the kind where you fetch kindling and come back before the tea cools. There's an old olive tree ahead. Gnarled, ancient, still bearing fruit with the stubbornness of someone who's outlived their gardener by 4 centuries. Beneath it you pause. You remember reading once that ancient Greeks would leave offerings to Hestia not on elaborate altars, but beside the fire after supper, scraps of bread, a splash of wine, a fig maybe. The kinds of things that say, you're part of this, too. Not flashy. Not blood-soaked. Just included. That's part of what made her strange among the gods. No violence. No scandal. No metamorphoses or tragic lovers flung off cliffs. Just a gentle, glowing presence in every home. And yet, somehow, she had the first share of every sacrifice. Before Zeus. Before Hera. Even before Poseidon, who probably pouted about it. The Greeks had a rule: nothing starts without the hearth. And nothing ends without it either. So you imagine a world where every ritual, feast, or declaration began by nodding at the quietest goddess in the room. That's power of a different kind. The kind that doesn't come from thunderbolts, but from being indispensable. And not just in myth. In practice, too. Because in Greek households, the hearth wasn't a symbol, it was literal. A clay or stone spot in the middle of the house, blackened with soot and layered with generations of ashes. Children were named beside it. Vows were made over it. Arguments were softened by it. It was where the warmth came from, and warmth is hard to argue with. You sit now, beneath the olive tree, knees drawn up and cloak tugged close. The world feels gentle here. Like someone already tucked it in. Just ahead, there's a hollow where a few wildflowers refuse to give up, even in the dark. Their petals look like they've forgotten what season it is, blooming as if someone whispered, "Just one more time." You smile, not because it's meaningful, but because it doesn't need to be. Nearby, something rustles in the brush, a rabbit maybe. Or a bored satyr rethinking his career. You don't investigate. That's not tonight's job. Tonight is about soft corners, faded myths, and gods who chose peace. Quirky detail. Hestia, despite being a virgin goddess, never demanded chastity from her followers. She wasn't interested in control. She was interested in harmony. Let Aphrodite handle the romantic chaos. Hestia just wanted everyone to get along over lentil soup. It's almost shocking she was ever offered a seat on Olympus at all. She doesn't exactly scream deity of thunderous influence. But then again, someone had to tend the flame, while the others posed dramatically. And Hestia never needed theatrics. She was the beginning. That was enough. In fact, when Dionysus showed up and everyone realized the divine couch situation was getting awkwardly cramped, Hestia's response wasn't, "Fight me for it." It was, "You know what? I'm good. I'll sit here by the fire." And that's how she gave up her throne, not out of weakness, but preference. Some scholars argue she was quietly removed from myths as the culture shifted. Others say she chose obscurity, knowing that the most essential parts of life are the ones least discussed. Either way, she stayed where it mattered. In the background. At the center. The hearth. The home. The memory of warmth. The breeze picks up, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and bread crusts. It smells like someone's just started breakfast early. You check the sky, still night, but the kind that's thinking about morning. Your eyelids feel a little heavier now. Not sleep, exactly. Just something. Hushed. It's not an ending. It's a warming. A pause. Like the breath before the fire catches. You rise again, legs whispering their quiet protest, and begin walking toward the village you passed earlier, at least, the idea of it. It isn't really a village tonight. It's more of a dream you once heard about in passing, one with whitewashed walls, flickering oil lamps, and bread ovens that never quite cool. You picture a small kitchen, stone-built and deeply shadowed, with a single clay hearth nestled into the corner like a sleeping cat. A woman moves slowly around it, folding herbs into a bundle of cloth. She hums something tuneless. The air smells of thyme and smoke and the ghost of roasted onions. This is Hestia's realm. Not Olympus. Not altars made of marble. But here, in this soft-lit hush where pots simmer and silence is considered sacred. The Greeks believed every home was a temple in miniature. Not in grandeur, but in ritual. The way a table was set. The way embers were coaxed back to life in the morning. The hearth wasn't just a source of heat, it was moral architecture. If you had a hearth, you had order. And if Hestia smiled on it, you had harmony. Historians still argue whether this central role of the hearth was driven more by social necessity or spiritual devotion. But honestly, when your whole world flickers by firelight, the line between sacred and convenient gets a bit fuzzy. You duck beneath an arbor strung with late summer grapes, the vines slightly drooping as if tired of their own sweetness. Your hands trail along the wood, catching a leaf or two. Overhead, a sleepy owl watches without judgment. There's something quietly absurd about worshipping a flame. It doesn't speak, doesn't demand, doesn't bless you with gold or punish you with frogs. But the Greeks did it anyway, night after night, feeding their hearths with olive oil and whispered thanks. And maybe that's why Hestia endured. Not because she dazzled, but because she listened. Or seemed to. You reach a courtyard now. Small, tiled, echoing faintly with the sound of distant sandals. In its center, a public hearth, likely used during festivals or emergencies, when private fires were low and someone needed warmth fast. The coals are buried under ash, sleeping. But once, this place held dozens of families close during a storm. Once, children circled here with honey cakes. Once, a traveler fell asleep by the flames and forgot why he'd ever been afraid. In some cities, these public hearths were guarded by priestesses who did very little other than stir coals and gently discourage arguments. An early form of conflict mediation, fire style. Just warm enough to keep people from yelling. You imagine that sort of job interview now. Qualifications? I don't scream when things crackle. You chuckle softly at the thought. And now your mind wanders again, this time to Hestia's few actual appearances in myth. Because yes, she had them, even if most were polite cameos. There's one story, of course, where Priapus, yes, that Priapus, tries to sneak up on her while she naps. It doesn't end well. A braying donkey ruins the moment, and Priapus gets chased off with metaphorical sandals to the face. Not exactly epic poetry, but it has charm. Quirky detail. After that particular fiasco, donkeys were occasionally honored in Hestia's festivals. You know, as a thank you for their well-timed braying. Only in Greek myth would a sleepy donkey be canonized for good manners. And here's the thing. Even though Hestia faded from popular storytelling, her presence lingered longer than most. Roman religion adopted her, of course, renaming her Vesta, giving her an entire cult of Vestal virgins who tended the sacred fire and avoided scandal at all costs. Those priestesses, by the way, had rules. Lots of rules. Don't let the fire go out. Don't break your vow of chastity. Don't feed the pigeons after dark. Okay, maybe not that last one. But their job was seen as so crucial to Rome's survival that any failure brought public shame and, occasionally, unpleasant consequences involving underground chambers. Yet even amid all that strictness, the idea held, aflame as the soul of a nation. And Hestia, quiet, overlooked Hestia, had sparked it. You step now into the edge of a grove, where cypress trees line the path like a sleepy honor guard. Their branches don't wave, they lean, as though listening. This feels like the kind of place where myths settle down. Where gods hang up their sandals and take a long sip of something warm. Somewhere between the trees, you spot a small shrine. Simple stone. No inscription. Just a hollow space where a fire once flickered. You imagine someone standing there, cup of wine in hand, murmuring thanks for a quiet night, a safe home, a fig tree that finally bore fruit. Because worship wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a soft glance at the flame and a whispered, "Stay lit." You kneel briefly, not in reverence, exactly. Just in curiosity. The stone is still faintly warm. Maybe from the sun. Maybe from memory. And then you remember another detail. Greeks would sometimes swear oaths by Hestia. Not by blood or sword or tempest. But by the hearth. By the idea that a promise made near warmth and bread meant more than one shouted in war. That's her real power. She didn't wield it. She contained it. She reminded the Greeks that even gods need a home. And that peace, while not dramatic, is sacred in its own way. The moon is lower now. The shadows stretch thinner. You follow the path out of the grove, heart lighter than when you entered. Not because of any revelation. But because sometimes stillness is the story. The path slopes gently now, curving back toward the edge of the dream you've been walking through, a dream stitched together with old stones and flickering hearth light. Your feet brush fallen leaves, crisp and curled like sleeping prayers, and for a moment you think you hear singing. Not a choir or chorus, but something domestic. A lullaby hummed by someone who knows the second verse and hums it anyway. This is the end of Hestia's domain, though truthfully, she never really leaves. That's her trick. She stays wherever there's warmth. In every myth, every ancient home, every temple with a smoke-stained ceiling and a pot left gently simmering too long, there she is, invisible but central. A god who never leaves her post because her post is wherever comfort lives. It's oddly lovely, isn't it? To be revered not for rage or conquest, but for constancy. For tending a fire that no one notices until it goes out. You step past a stone wall where ivy clings like it's afraid of falling. On the other side is a tiny courtyard, likely a place for quiet gatherings, where philosophers once spilled more wine than wisdom and debated the angle of virtue with sleepy passion. You picture a few old men on wicker chairs, swatting away gnats and praising moderation right up until someone mentions Plato. In the center of the space, there's a hearth that hasn't burned in centuries. But its shape still anchors everything around it. The room was built for it, not the other way around. That's something Hestia always understood. The fire doesn't fill the space, it defines it. Historians still argue whether her cult ever held true political power. She had no temples as grand as Zeus, no fanfare like Apollo, no tragic scandals like Hera's. But try living without heat. Without food. Without the unspoken grace of a place where people can gather without fighting. Suddenly, quiet starts looking like a superpower. You duck into the ruins of what might have been a dining hall, or a kitchen, or maybe just a storage room that grew spiritual over time. And there, painted faintly along a cracked bit of plaster, is a figure with a veil and a torch. No name. Just presence. You want to sit beside her. Not because you have questions, but because you're tired and she looks like she wouldn't mind. In a pantheon full of noisy relatives, Hestia is the one who hands you a blanket and says, "It's fine, just rest." The breeze has a faint scent now, olive wood and something sweet. Maybe myrrh. Maybe some mythical version of pie. You've stopped trying to identify it. Some mysteries can stay soft around the edges. You pass a niche in the wall where a small offering still sits, a half-melted candle, a fig dried into something that looks like a shriveled heart, and a polished pebble smoothed by years of being turned over in someone's pocket. There's devotion in the details. Even now. Especially now. And then, because your brain has a sense of humor, you think about how Hestia must have fared at family reunions. She had so many dramatic siblings, Poseidon stirring tsunamis into his cereal, Hades throwing shade in the corner, Demeter talking about wheat again. It's no wonder she chose the hearth over Olympus. No divine drama, just good bread and reliable warmth. There's a fragment of a hymn, passed down through centuries, that mentions her name first. Not because she demanded it, but because people knew, you light the fire before you do anything else. She wasn't the most exciting goddess, but she was always invited. You pause again, this time beside a crumbling mosaic. It shows a small home. Nothing special. One door, one window, one woman inside stirring something in a pot while a cat curls beneath the table. The image is barely clinging to the wall, but the meaning is loud in its stillness. Peace is not nothing. It's everything else made bearable. You start walking again, slower now. Each step quieter than the last. And the question creeps into your head, not loudly, just as a gentle tap on the windowsill of your thoughts. What would it look like if you tended your own inner hearth like that? If you treated your calm like something sacred, something worth protecting? Quirky detail. In some older households, it was common to place a small bowl of water or oil by the fire overnight, not for cooking, but as a way to invite dreams. The idea was that sleep travels better through warmed air. You like that? Even if it's nonsense, it's good nonsense. The moon is a silver coin now, low and heavy. And all around you, the world has dimmed to its lowest flame. The gods have stopped squabbling. The myths have curled up like cats beside the coals. And you? You're still here. Still walking. Still breathing in the quiet warmth that Hestia left behind. And it's enough. You don't notice the path changing until you've already followed it deeper. The stones beneath your feet are smoother now, like they've been worn down by centuries of sandals and intention. This isn't the terrain of high drama or epic battles. This is the soft footfall of routine, of things done not once but 1,000 times with reverence, and no applause. It smells faintly of warm flour and beeswax. The sort of scent you'd expect from a kitchen that never fully sleeps, where something is always cooling on the windowsill and someone is always about to say, "Just one more bite." You pass a low arch where vines curl along a faded mural, one that might have once depicted Hestia, or maybe just a woman with kind eyes and good posture. Either way, she holds a torch. It glows even though there's no fire painted. You find yourself among clay jars now. Shelves of them. some sealed, some not. This might have been a pantry once, or a votive storage room, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether spaces like these were strictly practical or partially sacred. But really, why not both? That's the charm of Hestia's world. Nothing flashy, but everything useful, durable, and somehow holy in its repetition. These aren't battle relics or philosopher's scrolls. These are jars of honey, bits of sage, tightly rolled cloth, and candles with wicks twisted just so. It's a symphony of domestic quiet. You stop beside one pot. The lid bears a single thumbprint, clearly someone's final tap before sealing it shut. You imagine that person had no idea they'd be immortalized by accident. Just another day, another batch of pickled something. But now you're staring at their thumbprint like it's a message. There's a soft bench nearby, worn smooth in the middle and slightly damp from time or maybe just mythological dew. You sit. The stone cradles you like an old friend who doesn't ask questions. Across from you is a small alcove with a few stones stacked carefully and a little bronze cup in the center. Some sort of offering, perhaps. Or maybe just a place where someone once said, "Let's leave this here, just in case." Quirky tidbit: some ancient Greek households trained their children to greet the hearth every morning with a tiny bow, just enough to acknowledge the flame. If they forgot, it wasn't considered rude, just unlucky. As though the day might unfold sideways unless you first nodded to the warmth that would carry you through it. You picture a sleepy child rubbing their eyes, muttering good morning to a fire they didn't start and couldn't explain. That's faith, in a way. Or maybe just respect for repetition. The air shifts, and you can hear something again, not words exactly, more like the rhythm of things continuing. A broom swishing against stone. A wooden spoon stirring steadily. The clink of pottery lids being lifted and replaced. This is Hestia's music. Domestic percussion. The sound of a world refusing to unravel because someone is quietly holding the center. You wonder, if she hadn't given up her throne, what would Olympus have become? A little warmer, maybe. A little less dramatic. Possibly fewer pomegranates launched in fits of rage. Historians still argue whether her absence made space for other stories, or whether she was never really gone, just unseen. You walk again, drawn now toward a staircase that leads nowhere grand. Just up to a small room with a window. The kind of space where someone might sit and mend things. Or daydream. Or write prayers they never intend to send. There's a spindle on the floor. Half a blanket rests in a basket still attached to the thread. Someone left mid-stitch and forgot to come back. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they trusted the fire to hold the rest of the story for them. From the window, you can see rooftops. Chimneys curling smoke into the twilight. One or two lamps flicker on in the distance. It's a world gently preparing for night. And in every one of those homes, there's a fire, or at least the memory of one. Hestia never needed temples with golden domes. She had kitchens. Bedrooms. Hearthstones kissed by generations of boots and knees and elbows propped during late-night chats about nothing in particular. You imagine her now, sitting cross-legged on a mat, slicing fruit with absolute focus. Not because the fruit is special, but because the moment is. That's her entire brand. Take the ordinary, hold it with care, and watch how it glows. Outside, the crickets begin their nightly speeches. It's less of a concert and more of a group therapy session, noisy but comforting. You lean into the sound. Somewhere far off, water drips into a basin. A cat pads across tile. A cup is set down gently. The world sighs. You want to stay here. Just a little longer. Not because anything's happening, but because nothing is. You're not being pulled toward danger or destiny. You're simply here. In the room. With the warmth. And that, you realize, is the gift. Not fire itself, but permission to rest beside it. You remain there, quiet and still, as though you, too, have become part of the hearth's gentle gravity. The bench beneath you feels like it's softened under your weight. Or perhaps it's your mind that's softened, rounding out its edges like pebbles in a stream. Even the air has slowed its rhythm, exhaling in time with yours. Eventually, you stand again, not out of urgency, but because the story wants to keep walking. Your steps feel muffled now, as though padded by centuries of footfall, each one whispering something you're just barely able to hear. You follow a narrow hallway lined with faded mosaics. One shows a seated figure surrounded by children, possibly Hestia, or someone pretending to be. Another shows a home with its walls peeled open like a dollhouse, tiny beds, little fires, and people you can barely make out, each going about their lives, all orbiting a single, glowing center. You pause in front of it. The warmth painted into the hearth is barely visible, just a brush of orange and gold. And yet, everything else bends toward it. That's the power of a still flame, it doesn't have to shout to be known. You turn a corner and find yourself in what feels like the final room. It isn't grand. A square chamber, undecorated save for a single raised platform in the middle. On it rests an ancient brazier. Cold now, but the soot stains say it once burned with conviction. Someone has left a few offerings here: dried fig, a ribbon of wool, a smooth stone shaped like a lentil. Ordinary things. But then again, that's the whole point. There's a small cushion nearby. Not throne-sized, lap-sized. The kind of cushion you'd find in a room designed not for rulership, but for listening. You imagine Hestia sitting here, cradling a bowl of olives, nodding as the world's chaos rushes past her doorway, choosing, always choosing, not to get up and join it. Because some gods win wars. Others hurl storms. But Hestia? Hestia chooses to remain. To guard the center. To feed the fire. And when offered power or comfort, she picks the one that helps others sleep better. Quirky tidbit: in some lesser-known rituals, families would symbolically carry a coal from their mother's hearth to a new home's fireplace, ensuring continuity, protection, and a bit of warmth from the old world tagging along into the new. It was believed that if the coal refused to catch, the house wasn't ready for the family. Or maybe the family wasn't ready for the house. You imagine holding that little ember in a clay dish, walking carefully down a dirt road, shielding it with your hand like it was the most fragile truth. It probably was. Historians still argue whether Hestia's popularity waned because her myths lacked spectacle, or whether it quietly endured because she lived in moments too small to record but too vital to forget. After all, people might forget who threw the thunderbolt, but they'll remember who kept the fire going while they cried beside it. You reach the doorway again, the path you came in from. The air outside is cooler now. Evening has settled, folding itself neatly around the rooftops like a cat curling on a warm stone. You step through and feel the hush of twilight wrap around you, just as the scent of smoke and time meets your nose. You pass by a baker's window. A round loaf is cooling beside the sill. The kind with a seam down the middle, like it's been smiling all day. Somewhere, a songbird chirps sleepily, as if unsure whether to start or stop its tune. You don't mind either way. The streets are quieter now, though not silent. A door creaks open and shut. A broom taps gently along cobblestones. A baby lets out a sleepy grumble, quickly soothed by the hum of a lullaby older than history. It's a neighborhood tucking itself in. You slow your steps, not because you're tired, but because everything around you is. The world is winding down, and it feels good to match its rhythm. Your thoughts drift to your own hearth, real or imagined. Maybe it's a literal fireplace, with logs stacked neatly beside it. Maybe it's a bedside lamp and a well-worn book. Or maybe it's just the quiet presence of someone you trust breathing evenly beside you in the dark. That's the beauty of Hestia's domain. You don't need temples. Just presence. Intention. A place where the flame can sit, unbothered and steady, long enough to remind you that you are home. And now, with the path behind you and the sky deepening to a gentle velvet, it's time to settle. Not just in body, but in mind. You've wandered far, through firelit halls and whispering kitchens, through stories carried by ash and ember, and all without ever needing to raise your voice or your heartbeat. That's Hestia's gift, isn't it? A slow permission. A nudge towards stillness. So you find a seat beneath a vine-covered wall. The stones are cool now, but not unfriendly. The kind of cool that welcomes a blanket and a yawn. Around you, the last of the birds tuck their heads under wings. A breeze drifts by, warm from the day, quiet from the night. Somewhere, a fire is being banked. Not extinguished, just tucked in. And that, too, is a kind of sacred act. Not everything needs to blaze. Sometimes a glow is enough. You breathe out. Slowly. Let the noise dissolve. Let your thoughts wander without needing to return. This story isn't one that ends with a bang or a prophecy. It ends like a lullaby does, by fading gently into something else. The coals are soft now. The world hums low. And in the still center of all things, Hestia smiles. You are safe. You are warm. You are home.